She had exactly 3 seconds to decide. Walk away, keep her head down, remain just another invisible waitress in a room full of power, or let her hand slip, spill a glass of water, and quietly save a stranger's life. Her heart raced as her eyes met the glass meant for him, the billionaire everyone feared and admired. What she didn't know was that this small, seemingly careless mistake would ripple far beyond that table. In those 3 seconds, she wasn't just choosing his fate, she was unknowingly rewriting her daughter's future forever. Sarah Mitchell had mastered the art of not being seen. It wasn't something she was proud of. It was something she'd learned out of necessity. In a world that rarely paused for struggling women, invisibility was her armor. At 29, she worked 3 jobs: mornings cleaning offices before sunrise, afternoons serving coffee to people who never learned her name, and nights as a waitress in a restaurant where the chandeliers cost more than her monthly rent. Every step she took, every breath she held, was for one reason: her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was small for her age, with bright eyes that still believed the world was kind. Sarah made sure that belief stayed alive, even if it meant sacrificing pieces of herself. She skipped meals so Lily could have seconds. She smiled through exhaustion so Lily wouldn't notice how tired her mother really was. And every night, no matter how late she came home, Sarah sat beside Lily's bed until her breathing softened into sleep. Life hadn't always been this hard, but it had never been gentle either. After Lily's father disappeared without a goodbye, Sarah learned a painful truth. Being noticed didn't always mean being protected. Sometimes it meant being hurt. So she learned to blend into walls, to lower her gaze, to never draw attention. At the restaurant, she moved like a shadow between tables, efficient, silent, forgettable. The managers liked that. The customers barely registered her existence. And Sarah preferred it that way. Invisible people didn't get questioned. Invisible people didn't get blamed. She told herself this was temporary, that one day, Lily would grow up and remember not the struggle, but the love. Until then, Sarah would endure. She would survive. She would stay invisible, because in her world, being unseen was the safest way to keep the one person she loved most alive and smiling. She didn't know yet that invisibility, the very thing she depended on, was about to be shattered, and that when it was, everything would change. Daniel Cross arrived without noise, yet the room shifted the moment he stepped inside. Sarah noticed it from across the restaurant. How conversations softened, how shoulders straightened, how even the waitstaff seemed to move more carefully. Power had a presence, and Daniel Cross carried it like a second skin. He was young for a billionaire, mid-30s at most, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that looked effortless rather than flashy. His face was calm, controlled, but his eyes scanned the room with quiet calculation, as if he never stopped measuring the world around him. The manager hurried over, smiling too much, bowing slightly as he guided Daniel and his guests toward the private dining section at the back. A secluded space, heavy curtains, limited access, the kind of table reserved for people who didn't want to be overheard or interrupted. Sarah was assigned to that section for the night. Her stomach tightened. Private dinners meant higher expectations and smaller margins for error. Wealthy men with fragile egos. Conversations that paused when she approached. Tips that depended on silence as much as service. She reminded herself to stay invisible. The men seated with Daniel spoke in low voices, their words clipped and careful. Stock movements, acquisitions, deadlines. Phrases like control, leverage, and final approval floated just above a whisper. Sarah didn't understand most of it, but she understood enough to know it wasn't casual conversation. This wasn't a celebration. It was a negotiation, sharp, tense, and dangerous in its own quiet way. Daniel listened more than he spoke. When he did, the table fell silent. His voice was steady, carrying authority without effort. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. People leaned in when he talked. Then there was Philip Warren. Sarah noticed him because he tried too hard not to be noticed. Philip sat to Daniel's right, impeccably dressed, his smile polished and permanent. On the surface, He looked like every other successful executive, confident, composed, respectful. But Sarah had spent years reading people the way others read menus. She recognized forced ease when she saw it. Philip's hand trembled slightly whenever he lifted his glass. It was subtle, almost nothing, but Sarah saw it. She also noticed how his eyes never fully met Daniel's, how they darted to the door, the curtains, the table, as if checking his surroundings again and again. He laughed a beat too late at jokes. He spoke too quickly when pressed. And when Daniel excused himself briefly to take a phone call, Philip's smile vanished entirely. Sarah felt a familiar tightening in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had years ago, right before Lily's father walked out the door for the last time. The feeling that something was off, that the air had shifted. That danger didn't always announce itself loudly. She tried to ignore it. Instincts didn't pay rent. Overthinking led to mistakes. Mistakes led to attention. Still, as she refilled glasses and placed plates, her eyes kept returning to Philip, especially when the drinks arrived. Expensive crystal, dark amber liquid, ice clinking softly. Philip watched as Daniel's glass was set down, his gaze lingering just a second too long. Sarah told herself she was imagining things. But then Philip reached out. His fingers brushed Daniel's glass. Not enough to draw notice, not enough for anyone else to question it. Just a slight adjustment, a subtle turn of the wrist, the kind of movement that could be dismissed as nothing at all. Sarah's breath caught. She stood frozen for half a second, tray in hand, her mind racing. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know why her pulse suddenly thundered in her ears. But every instinct she had, every survival lesson learned through years of quiet suffering, screamed the same warning. Something was very, very wrong. Daniel returned to the table, unaware. He reached for his glass, continuing the conversation as if nothing had changed. Philip leaned back, relaxed now, his smile finally genuine. Sarah's heart pounded. She thought of Lily, of her small hands clutching a stuffed rabbit at night, of the promise Sarah made to always protect her. Staying invisible meant staying safe. But safety, she realized, was about to be tested. And whatever was in that glass was not meant for Daniel Cross to survive. Sarah saw it, not clearly at first, just a flicker of movement, a subtle shift that most people would miss. Philip's hand moved with practiced calm, shielding the glass from the others for barely a heartbeat. A tiny vial, no bigger than a pen cap, slipped between his fingers. A quick tilt, a silent tap. Then it was gone. The wine didn't change color. The ice didn't react. Nothing dramatic happened. And yet, everything inside Sarah stopped. The world around her seemed to stretch and distort, like time itself had taken a slow, uneven breath. The hum of conversation dulled. The clink of silverware faded into a distant echo. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart, each beat screaming the same impossible truth. That glass was poisoned. Her hands began to shake. She gripped the edge of the tray, so hard her knuckles turned white. This wasn't her business. This wasn't her place. Powerful men solved their own problems, often at the expense of people like her. She was a waitress, a single mother, invisible by design. If she spoke up, she would be questioned. If she accused the wrong man, she could lose her job, or worse. She had Lily to think about. Lily, who needed her mother more than she needed justice or bravery. Sarah's mind flooded with images. Lily's laugh as she chased pigeons in the park. Lily's tiny fingers tugging at her sleeve when she had nightmares. Lily asking innocent questions about a father who never came back. Sarah had promised herself she would never put Lily at risk, never draw attention, never become a problem. She told herself to look away. Daniel lifted the glass. Her breath caught in her throat. 3 seconds. That was all she had. 3 seconds to decide whether she would live the rest of her life knowing she could have stopped it, or whether she would do something terrifying and irreversible. Her legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. Fear clawed at her chest. What if she was wrong? What if this was nothing? What if she ruined everything for nothing? But then she saw Philip's face. The tension was gone now. His shoulders were relaxed. His eyes followed the glass with quiet satisfaction. That smile, small, controlled, confident, answered every doubt she had left. Daniel raised the glass closer to his lips. Sarah moved. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She stepped forward, just slightly off balance, as if distracted. Her elbow clipped the edge of the table. The tray tilted. The glass slipped. The sound of shattering crystal exploded through the room. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, splashing over documents, soaking into linen, dripping onto the polished floor. The conversation stopped instantly. Chairs scraped. Voices rose in surprise and irritation. "I'm so sorry," Sarah gasped, dropping to her knees, hands trembling as she tried to gather the broken pieces. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. "I didn't see. I'm so sorry, sir." The manager rushed over, face pale with panic. Philip shot to his feet, his earlier calm cracking for just a fraction of a second. Daniel, however, stayed seated. He stared at the ruined tablecloth, at the shattered glass, at Sarah's shaking hands. Then he looked up at her. Something in his expression changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't annoyance. It was realization. His eyes flicked briefly to Philip, then back to the wine spreading like a dark stain between them. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel pushed his chair back and stood. "Everyone out," he said quietly. The room froze. The manager hesitated. Philip opened his mouth to protest. But Daniel's voice, though calm, carried an authority that brooked no argument. "Now!" The staff cleared the room in seconds. Sarah tried to stand, but her legs nearly gave out. She expected to be escorted out, fired on the spot. Instead, Daniel extended a hand. "You didn't trip," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Sarah's throat tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes. She looked down at her stained uniform, at the broken glass cutting into her palm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what else to do." Daniel helped her to her feet. His gaze was steady, searching her face, not with suspicion, but with gratitude and something close to awe. "You made a choice," he said, "and it saved my life." Outside the room, chaos waited. Inside, in the quiet aftermath of shattered crystal and spilled wine, Sarah Mitchell understood one thing with absolute clarity. She would never be invisible again. Daniel Cross had survived enough boardrooms, betrayals, and backroom deals to recognize truth when it stood in front of him, quiet, shaking, and terrified. The restaurant's private room was sealed within minutes. Security flooded in, discreet but unmistakable. Phones were confiscated. Names were taken. Statements were recorded. And yet, the most important conversation happened in near silence. Daniel sat across from Sarah, a clean glass of water untouched in front of him. He hadn't asked her to repeat the story. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The glass fragments had been collected. The tablecloth was gone. The wine residue was already being analyzed. Philip Warren was gone. By the time security reached the parking garage, his car was abandoned, engine still warm. Daniel leaned back, exhaling slowly. "He's been positioning himself for months," he said, more to himself than to her. "Delaying deals, undermining votes. I thought it was ambition." He looked at Sarah again, his jaw tightening. "I didn't think it was murder." Sarah sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, her body still trembling with delayed shock. "I didn't mean to get involved," she said quietly. I saw something." Daniel nodded. "And you did something?" His voice hardened. "That makes you a liability to him." The word landed like a blow. Liability. The manager entered, pale and sweating. "Mr. Cross, the police are on their way." Daniel stood immediately. "No," he said. "Not yet." The manager blinked. "Sir, if Philip poisoned my drink, he's already planned for law enforcement involvement. I want control before this becomes public." He turned to Sarah. "Do you have anyone waiting for you tonight?" "My daughter," she said instantly. "Lily. She's 6. Daniel's expression shifted. "Where is she now?" "At home. Alone. I had a sitter, but she left an hour ago." Daniel was already moving. "You're not going home." Fear bloomed in Sarah's chest. "What?" Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then frowned. "A police precinct," he muttered. He answered. "Daniel Cross." Sarah couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she saw the change in his face, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the stillness. When the call ended, he didn't put the phone away. That, he said quietly, was not the police. Sarah's breath caught. They said there's been an incident involving your address, Daniel continued. They asked me to confirm your name before sending officers. Her blood ran cold. My address? Yes. He looked directly at her. Philip knows who you are. The room seemed to tilt. My daughter, Sarah whispered. Oh God, Lily. Daniel snapped his fingers. Get a car ready. Now. What followed happened too fast and too slow all at once. Sarah barely remembered grabbing her coat, barely remembered the drive through the city as Daniel's security convoy split traffic like a blade. Her phone buzzed constantly, missed calls from unknown numbers, voicemail she was too afraid to open. When they reached her apartment building, police lights were already flashing. But something was wrong. The officers standing outside didn't look like the ones she'd seen before. Their uniforms were off, their car markings slightly misaligned. Daniel didn't let her out of the vehicle. Stay here, he said sharply. He stepped out, spoke briefly to his head of security. Within seconds, weapons were drawn, but discreetly controlled. The men posing as officers bolted. Later, Daniel would tell her they vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but gloves and a broken radio. Professionals. Clean. Gone. Sarah ran up the stairs, her legs barely holding her. Lily, she cried, throwing open the apartment door. Her daughter sat on the couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide but dry. Mommy, Lily whispered. Some men knocked. I didn't open. Sarah dropped to her knees and pulled Lily into her arms, sobbing openly now. You did so good, she choked. You did exactly right. Lily clung to her. Are you in trouble? Sarah looked up to see Daniel standing in the doorway, his presence oddly grounding. No, Daniel said gently. Your mom is very brave. That night, Sarah and Lily didn't sleep at home. They were moved to a secure location, quiet, guarded, hidden. Lily was given warm food, clean pajamas, and a room bigger than their entire apartment. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed long after her daughter fell asleep, staring at the unfamiliar walls. This was the cost. Not applause. Not instant relief. Fear. The next days were worse. A brick through a window of a building near one of Daniel's offices, with Sarah's name spray-painted nearby. A voicemail, distorted, low, threatening. You should have stayed invisible. Surveillance footage surfaced showing Philip meeting with men Sarah didn't recognize. Bank accounts were frozen. Shell companies unraveled. Daniel kept his word. He stayed 3 steps ahead. But even he couldn't erase the danger completely. One evening, as Sarah watched Lily draw at the dining table of their temporary home, she finally spoke the thought that had been tearing her apart. I ruined her life, she said quietly. Daniel looked up from his laptop. You saved mine. That doesn't matter if something happens to her, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I never wanted this world. I just wanted to keep her safe. Daniel closed the laptop and sat across from her. Sarah, doing the right thing doesn't come with safety guarantees, he said. It comes with consequences. She swallowed hard. Then why does it feel like I'm being punished? He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, because courage is expensive, and the bill always comes due. Sarah nodded slowly. She looked at her daughter, safe for now, laughing softly as she colored, and understood the truth she'd been avoiding. Staying invisible had never truly protected them. It had only delayed the danger. And now that the world had seen her, there was no turning back. Part 5. Kindness changes everything. The truth came out quietly, the way the most powerful truths often do. Daniel Cross didn't hold a press conference or seek public sympathy. He let the evidence speak. Financial records were opened. Emails were traced. Shell companies collapsed under the weight of their own lies. Philip Warren was arrested in a country that didn't ask questions until it was too late not to. The poison was identified. The intent was undeniable. The story never mentioned a waitress by name. That was Daniel's choice. Sarah and Lily were given what they needed most. Not luxury, not headlines, but stability. When the danger finally receded, Daniel sat across from Sarah one last time in a quiet office overlooking the city. You said once you didn't want this world, he told her. I believe you. She nodded. I just want a future where my daughter doesn't have to be afraid. Daniel slid a folder across the desk. Inside was an acceptance letter. Tuition covered. Flexible hours. Childcare included. Nursing school, he said simply. You already know how to care for people. This just gives you the tools. Sarah stared at the papers, hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from something dangerously close to hope. Why are you doing this? Daniel didn't hesitate. Because you did the right thing when it cost you everything. The world doesn't reward that enough. Years passed. Sarah studied harder than she ever had, balancing textbooks and bedtime stories, exhaustion and determination. Lily grew taller, louder, braver. She stopped flinching at sudden noises. She slept through the night. Sarah became a pediatric nurse, the kind who knelt to a child's level, who explained instead of rushed, who understood fear because she'd lived with it. Parents trusted her instinctively. Children reached for her without hesitation. Daniel visited the hospital once a year, quietly funding a wing for families who couldn't afford care. He and Sarah spoke sometimes, never about what could have been, only about what mattered. Their bond wasn't built on romance, but on something stronger: respect, gratitude, and shared understanding. On Lily's graduation day, Sarah watched her daughter step into the world with confidence and light. No fear, no shadows. That night, Sarah stood alone for a moment, breathing in the stillness. She had once believed invisibility was survival. She now knew better. One act of kindness, chosen in 3 terrifying seconds, had changed everything. Sarah didn't save a life with power, money, or influence. She saved it with courage, found in a quiet, terrifying moment when no one was watching. One small act of kindness, one choice made in fear, sent ripples far beyond that night, shaping a future she could never have imagined. The world rarely changes through grand heroes or loud victories. It changes when ordinary people choose to act. One moment, one choice, one spilled glass of water.